Malibu Creek is an area that drains about 104 square miles in the Santa Monica Mountains. The watershed has changed tremendously over the last 100 years, most specifically in the last 50 years. There are many houses and developments in this watershed that contribute to the water flow that ends up here at Malibu Lagoon. And it adds more water to the drainage than was there under natural conditions. There are more paved surfaces in the watershed, and that means that natural water, which would have percolated through the ground and probably ended up here over a longer period of time, now hits a paved surface, runs very quickly into a storm drain, into the creek, and comes down to the lagoon. And this means that we have flows of water that are substantially different from the past.
Over the years, it has become so filthy, and the algae growth is all encrusted all over the rocks. It's just a disaster. There's garbage and trash, and then the water smells.
It stinks.
There's great concern on the part of the surfing community when this lagoon is opened, the sand berm is breached, and the water flows out into the surfing zone.
When I was a kid here, I remember a lot more sea life in terms of sea urchins, in terms of kelp, and in terms of quality of the water.
Right now there are about 85,000 people living in the watershed. There used to be a couple thousand there.
We're living in an area that we depend upon for recreation. We depend upon that area for our livelihoods in many cases. We depend upon that area for food in the form of finfish and shellfish. And we also depend upon that area for the disposal of wastes.
Malibu is also known as Malibu. Malibu was given the name by the Chumash people that came here about 30,000 years ago. They came to this area and they saw the surf, the way it came into the beach and the way it crashed and made the loud roaring sound. It echoed through the canyon. So then they gave it the name Malibu, which means where the surf sounds loudly.
Malibu means incredibly fun surf.
Malibu is probably the best surfing spot in Southern California.
Since I retired about 3 years ago, I surf maybe 3, 4, 5 times a week. All depends on the waves.
Malibu is one of the best waves in the world.
Closest thing to paradise I know of.
This whole area, there's big turtles in there, birds, cranes, loons, herons, and ducks and geese, and various numbers of wildlife that would come and rest in this area for their winter nesting area.
The Malibu Creek is a very beautiful area that many people throughout the years have experienced as hikers. I used to go fishing in that creek with my father as a child.
The California Department of Parks and Recreation is charged with managing natural systems in a natural way. Our ideal goal is to try to mimic or work with nature as best we can so that the watershed is managed as it would have functioned under normal conditions.
The ocean has always been a very convenient source of waste disposal. It's very easy to put waste materials into the ocean, and presumably they are out of sight and out of mind. That's always been the logic that people have used when they've used the coastal ocean for waste disposal. Or some people have said dilution is the solution, falsely believing that the ocean is so infinite in its capacity to absorb wastes that we don't need to worry about it.
There have been people that have said that they have become ill from swimming in the water out there.
Yeah, I got strep throat 6 times in a row.
There's an extreme itch and my skin turns, will start to get blotchy and itchy.
Well, I did have open heart surgery after I had come down here, and I did swallow great quantities of water on a heavy day here. They probed and took a look at everything. They discovered that I had a valve that had been infected by bacteria. The valve had been indeed affected to the degree where it should be removed.
If I tell you, Bob, don't go in the water, and you say, I'm sorry, I'm going in the water, there's nothing we can do to stop you. If you choose to go in water after you've been duly notified, that's your choice.
I'd rather not see any surfers out there when the water comes flowing out of the lagoon.
We had heard many complaints from residents of illnesses such as giardia, flavomona, infections of the eye, intestinal problems. Surfers had complained to us, residents living along the beach had complained, and they believed it was coming from tapia.
Just because someone is at the beach and they get sick doesn't mean water quality had anything to do with that illness. There are too many different inputs, including from food to just respiratory infections. There are a lot of other things that could be working.
Can't prove it, you know how that goes.
There's nothing I could document it with. This is the only place I ever surf. 3 and 4 times, 5 times, 6 times a week.
One of the dilemmas we face is, especially in rainstorms, is that's when the surfers want to go out and surf because they have the best waves during storm activity. But we also know that even when we close beaches, the surfers are there. They disregard, our best advice. What people should do, number one, is avoid the immediate area of the discharge, Malibu Lagoon, or of any other surface water discharge in the surf zone. We advise people to avoid swimming, especially or body contact around, and especially around storm danger discharges for 72 hours after a rainstorm. Because we know at least we know the bacteriological levels are much higher at those times.
There are several options that we have on improving on the current breaching protocol for the lagoon. We can let the lagoon just top over naturally. So that would be one option. The other option would be to find a different way of transporting the water from the lagoon into the ocean, where it would go naturally anyway in the wintertime, when the flows are large enough to breach that the sandbar. So I don't think anybody has really looked at any one of these options in detail, and that's what we need to do.
Work that I have done in this area, plus the work that I have followed with regard to physical oceanography and current patterns and movements and settling of waste in the ocean, clearly demonstrates that materials do not instantly dissipate and dilute, but instead they can often meander for miles and miles, hundreds of miles.
I've seen that with surfers that have blown out to sea. They tend to blow back in eventually someplace either north or south of the point of entry in the water. So I would assume the same thing would be true of sewage or garbage or anything else put in the water.
There seems to be a rather large controversy about the actual health impacts on people in the water, in the surf zone, and exactly what is causing those health impacts.
Malibu Creek, at the time of maximum flush, you can't get rid of all of the accumulation of the effluent from the sewage treatment in the upper part of the canyon. No way.
So we're looking at sources right now to find out what could be the most likely source of disease-causing organisms in the lagoon, where might they come from, and then stop them. Here in the Malibu area, we're focusing particularly on watershed management. We chose the Malibu Creek Watershed as a pilot case, a test case, where we can cooperatively come to some solutions on what the problems are, what we need to do about them, and how to manage it a little bit more efficiently.
The people are in the watershed. The water in need of treatment, the sewage in need of treatment, is in the watershed.
What's currently being done is all the sewage goes to the Tapia Water Reclamation Plant. It receives 3 steps of cleansing and cleaning by the time it comes out at the end of the process. the water is ready to be reused for irrigation.
We became the City of Malibu Wastewater Study Group. Prior to incorporation, we formed the group. It was in 1990 after the election, at the city's request. And the city gave us the direction to go out and explore alternative technologies and testing. After 7 or 8 months, the study group gathered a lot of material, scientific data regarding viruses and other human pathogens in effluent, and the fact that the testing methodology was inadequate. Very concerned about the Tapia treatment plant because in spite of the fact that they were saying that the water was sterilized, we did not believe this to be so, especially with the algae growth that was obvious. The nutrient loads in the water were obviously very high, and the smell, plus the people that were getting certain kinds of diseases that are a human pathogen could only have gotten them from effluent type water, we were told, by the health department. On doing some investigation, we learned that the Water Quality Board in 1969 had banned any discharge of effluent into the Malibu Creek.
Currently, we're trying to find out whether the water treatment plant contributes pathogens in spite of the fact that they're on tertiary they release tertiary treated effluent. In other words, it should meet all the standards, but we want to be doubly sure that they actually eliminate all the viruses out of their effluent before it's used for reclaimed water or discharged into the creek.
Well, after talking with these scientists and reading their research papers and looking at some of the seminar material that they had given us, it was quite obvious that this is impossible, that chlorine was not killing these entities, and perhaps they were becoming dormant and viable but non-culturable.
A very important subset of all bacteria, called the gram-negative bacteria, are capable of going into this dormant response where they can no longer be grown. They're still very much alive, and under conditions that we don't understand yet, when introduced into the proper habitat, they can grow out and manifest whatever property they are supposed to manifest.
Since we do have people living in the creek at different places along the creek, and we do have people going down there for recreation purposes and staying down there all day, we can assume that there is a certain amount of bacteria entering the creek from people that are in the creek other than residences. But I would say that the majority of the foreign materials that are in the creek come from other human activity in the basin, like transportation, housing, businesses that are there. And they're not doing anything illegal, it's just collectively their impact is harmful to the creek.
Many of these sources are very difficult to pinpoint, very difficult to identify, and consequently, very difficult to identify exactly how much water comes from all those sources, whether they be septic tanks, leach fields, people watering lawns, irrigation that goes on that didn't go on in the past.
If we thought it was unsafe at all, we would close that beach. Now, compliance with a closure is a different issue. But if we thought it was unsafe for those people to be out there, we would order that beach closed.
There's no way they can keep people out of the water.
The fact remains, however, that every way that water quality is measured in Malibu Beach or anywhere in Santa Monica Bay, for that matter, except in very rare instances, meets all the standards that have been developed to protect human health. If there's going to be a challenge, the standards have to be challenged. But they're the best we have to work with. We have no other way than what's developed today, and that is sampling and measuring total coliform, fecal coliform, and enterococcus to judge the safety of that water. And when somebody comes along with a better mousetrap, so to speak, then maybe we can use it, but there is no better. By those parameters, however, that water is safe for recreational activity.
Most of our testing methodologies are based on the detection of living bacteria. We cultivate them, we culture them, or we grow them, if you will, And if we find them, we determine that the water sample that we've tested is not suitable for human contact or consumption, or the milk sample is not suitable for human consumption, or the food sample, or whatever sample we happen to be testing, including Santa Monica Bay for recreational purposes. But if we don't find the coliforms and the fecal coliforms, we falsely conclude that it's safe. And we're not recognizing the fact that the indicators that we have chosen to use, the coliforms and the fecal coliforms, might simply be in this hibernation state, very much alive, but they're just not detectable.
Unless one can measure statistically that you have a higher illness rate with higher bacterial counts, you haven't, there's no proof at all that water quality causes illness. And that's why we need an epidemiology study.
If there's no input to Tapia, that means there's no effluent from Tapia and there's no further dumping into the Malibu Creek. So you can stop that by no further input. If you can't stop that, then it's time to do the epidemiological studies that will establish that in fact this is a hazard to the community of Malibu, including the surfers and everybody else.
Such epidemiology study, to be of any validity, would have to actively monitor the presence of pollutants, human pathogens, in the water, and actively search for the disease in people who are using those waters, and find the pathogens as the causation of the disease.
Until we have an epidemiology study, there is no, and that proves otherwise, as a regulatory agency, we have no other means to gauge what we consider safe or unsafe, or an elevated risk to those who use it. We measure by the best available means, and that water is safe according to those standards.
The California Water Quality Assessment Report, which was most recently updated in 1992, identifies the Malibu Lagoon area as an impaired water body. What an impaired water body means is that we feel that that water body is not fully meeting its beneficial uses. And one or more of those uses are impaired in some way. We have identified some potential sources that are causing those problems, but that's part of our overall watershed effort really, is to nail these down and really define what the problems are. We've been doing some intensive monitoring in the last several months on the entire upper watershed. We've had a network of 16 stations that we've been looking at, which really covers the watershed.
The solution to those kinds of problems is often an educational solution. People really don't realize they're doing any harm. In fact, they may think that's the best place to do that, given the area that they find themselves in. So education, I think, is a more important component in that kind of activity than is prosecution.
The more people know about it, the faster we can come to solutions. Unfortunately, the political situation is such that there are conflicting interests everywhere, and the status quo is always the easiest. So that's what we have to run up against, and that's why we have this whole coordinated effort to change the status quo.
There are thresholds beyond which the stream can't keep cleaning itself, and if you exceed those thresholds, you will find less different kinds of plants and less different kinds of animals than you used to.
In the watershed study plans, there are both short-term and long-term goals. We would like to come up with some short-term ways to manage this water level in a way that's acceptable to all parties concerned.
We import 17,000 acre-feet per year into this watershed just to support the thirst of the 80,000 people that live here. And they don't just drink the 17,000 acre-feet per year. They use it for toilet flushing, they use it for landscape irrigation, they use it for showers, washing machines, everything. If we can get gray water reuse ordinances implemented throughout the watershed, not just in Malibu, we can actually reduce the flows in the creek significantly.
Let's assume that everything is in there. How do we go about sterilizing it so that we've removed the disease-causing pathogens? And to that end, the study group had gone out and discovered that the ozone technology and ultraviolet technology would do exactly that.
We want to keep the water of a sufficient quality that it sustains that natural heritage, those animals and those plants. We want to keep the water of a sufficient quality that people can enjoy it for recreation purposes, and we want to tell people about the importance of preserving our natural heritage and give some information or make information available as to what could impact that heritage. So getting the word out about how a creek can become less pristine than it was, or even go over the line and become an undesirable place in one way or another, is an important story that people need to know if they're going to do something to prevent it.
Malibu Creek State Park, Malibu Creek, Malibu Lagoon State Beach, Surfrider Beach are certainly prime examples of California's best natural resources. Our responsibility as individuals is to help protect those resources by taking those actions that we can to not pollute the streams, not pollute the lagoon, not pollute the ocean, and then getting involved with groups or organizations that can bring about legislation or funding to help resolve some of these complex issues here at Malibu Lagoon State Beach.
Formulas, things are patented. They all come from ideas generated from this nucleus here at Malibu Beach.
Get better.
Malibu is an important place in California surfing because it's the first impression that a lot of people from outside of California and the United States get of the ocean environment in California. It's close to the biggest population center on the West Coast, and people come here and they expect to see a beautiful ocean, nice long clean beach, and when they get here a lot of times they see signs that say don't go in the water because it's too dirty. And so to me Malibu is one of those places that it needs to be preserved and it needs to be saved, just like reestablish the environment that may have been here in the 40s and 50s with lobster and abalone growing on these rocks. It's something that needs to be preserved as a part of our surfing heritage in California.
This is not a pretty song. River run right down to the sea. It used to run so naturally. It used to run quite chemical free. But things have changed. The dolphins don't play in the bay. Seems like they've all gone away. The whales swim out of their way. The mystery remains. Up and down the coast, you know it just get burned. The chemicals hot before the world burns. Then the color of money ain't that green when the color of our bay ain't too clean. You know what I mean? And it may take more than a year and a week. It may take losing some sleep. It's gonna take digging down deep to clean up the creek. Gotta start somewhere. Clean up the creek. I know it's gonna take more than a month. but I got a hunch we could do a whole bunch, clean up the creek. 'Cause up and down the coast, you know it just gets burned. The chemicals hot before the world learns. May take more than 10 years and a day before they can clean up the bay. But I bet you in a year and a week we can clean up the creek. It's gonna take more than a week. It's gonna take losing some sleep. It's gonna take digging down deep, clean up the creek. Up and down the coast, you know it just get burned. The chemicals hot before the world learns. Gonna take more than 10 years and a day before they can clean up the bay. But I bet you in a year and a week we could clean up the creek. It's gonna take more than a week. It's gonna take losing some sleep. It's gonna take digging down deep, clean up the creek.